It's the SWP Disciple checking in. Alright, so just going for I won't call it late night. You can see I'm listening to Hoops Tonight, talking about Victor Wembanyama on the Spurs. I never paid attention to like the info screen while I'm listening to a podcast, but yeah, you can see Jason Tim's podcast there, and I guess the title, Why Victor Wembanyama, I don't know why I'm having a hard time. I'm so used to calling him just Wemby. Victor Wembanyama is number 7 in the league. There he is. And that's on their list. They're doing like their top 25 players or whatever. Number 8 was LeBron, and now they're on number 7. It was a nice podcast. I listened to it while I shot at the gym a little bit and got some shots up. My J has been particularly wet lately, and my balance and everything, handle's been nicer. It's too bad I'm old. I wish I had this when I was younger, so I'd be like quicker. But anyway, you know, delusions of grandeur. So maturing is realizing that sometimes the villain is correct, or at least partially correct. So just catching you up. So work's been busy this week, and we have like some continuing education that we got to do. So that's been kind of made the day a little more dense. I did get a clean break off from work. Now, I didn't play old man hoop up north in East Hampton, so that's why I went and shot around by myself after, you know, going to like do my normal routine at the gym. But because I got such a quick jump on the day and like left the house at maybe like 6:30 or so. Of course, I work 9:30 to 6. I was able to get all my everything done early. So, I mean, it's getting late now. It's 9:52 because I've been driving around for a while, just kind of alone with my thoughts. Went to Walmart just to walk around. Dang it, I'm cheap, man. I in a sense, I should say. So I still have those gift cards burning a hole in my pocket. About to add probably another couple $100 to it in terms of gift cards for my birthday next week. Me and Beyonce. Still have not identified anything to spend that $2,100, probably soon to be like $2,300 on. I want to make sure it hits. Man, it would be so cool to just walk into a car dealership and with both my cars, and then plus, you know, another $2,000 in cash, whatever, put down on something that could do some damage. That would be like, I don't know, like close to $30,000 or so in terms of a down payment. I know it's not the right thing to do, but there is a reality out there where I probably should do it before my scheduled dream car time, just because school is going to stretch so far into the future and into my middle age that there is a path where I could very easily justify in the next year getting even a GTR if I wanted to, right? Can you imagine me getting a Nissan GTR? It could happen, but it would be stupid. But, you know, I could. It's certainly on the table if I wanted to. You know, obviously used, not new. I don't have $100,000, but I could certainly get one for like 65 or something like that in the next year. I could do it right now, but I probably won't. So anyway, Kevin Samuels, right? So damn, it's already been, I guess, what, 3 years since he passed? Was it like I think it was like May of 2022? That is insane. Time, like he blew up in the pandemic and passed well back in the pandemic, you know, so far back that the pandemic wasn't even really over, and still had like another like couple years to go, and he'd already been, you know, dead and gone. You know, God rest his soul. I didn't agree with a lot of what he had to say. I thought, you know, he was misogynist. I think he covertly pushed like a right-wing agenda. I think a lot of things that weren't good for the country and for our discourse. But, you know, he's right, or has proven to be at least quasi-right on certain things. So how can I condense this? I'm already 4 minutes in, and I really haven't gotten to the thought. So, of course, you know, single. I don't know if I'm necessarily ready to mingle. I'm still in the hangover as it approaches 3 years since things ended with my ex. But like, you know how I am. So, and then also the backdrop of like, you know, some school woes and yada yada yada. So anyway, you know, I love Instagram. I guess tangentially Facebook, even though it's kind of based on Facebook. But, you know, Facebook's like old hat. I keep that really just for, you know, older folks in my family and like, you know, distant friends and stuff like that. Speaking of which, I legit today today, as I was walking into the gym, into Best Fitness, bumped into the captain of my track team. So like, I know him very well. We were on the track team together for like 2-3 years in high school. And, he had long since moved. He really came up because he was a bit of a knucklehead, and then basically just, I don't know if pull himself up by the bootstraps, because I don't think he was really that hard scrabble or anything like that, but definitely turned things around, and I suspect it's because of what became his wife. So without saying too much, his what became his wife was quite the hot item back in high school. We all went to high school together, of course, and everybody liked her. And some of the girls used to hit on her and call her Black Barbie, and like, oh, you think she's so perfect, whatever. And they'd always kind of do what a lot of people do when they just don't like someone. They kind of posture as if they have like some like special information that they know and no one else knows that would make you think less of her or whatever. And nothing, as far as I can tell, very, very spotless, very nice girl. I used to have a major thing for her, but I wasn't up to par. I never made a play for it either. I was also very like awkward and stuff back in high school, like a lot of us were. But I do, in a lot of ways, when I look back, cherish like when I would miss the bus to school. Part of it because I would just like wake up too late, and then also because I didn't particularly like some of the kids that were on the bus with me. So I would just walk to school because I was, about 2 miles away from school. I only remember that because that was the stipulation. You had to be at least 2 miles to get like a bus pass, because we use the PVTA, Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, so like the public buses to get into school. Some routes, because they were like off the public bus route, would use a regular like yellow school bus or whatever, shorter, long. But we use public transportation, and the school would provide like essentially vouchers or tokens so we could get on the bus. And I remember I was 2.3 miles away from school because I was just over the threshold. I remember my mom kind of had to fight because at one point when they did the original measurements, I think me and my cousins were like 1.8, 1.9 miles away, and thus either had to pay to take the bus or walk into school. And then they remeasured, and it was like 2.3 miles. Many years ago, I did that drive. I don't want to lie to you. I feel like it was more like right at 2.0 or 2.1, but long story short is that we qualified, right? And you're probably wondering like, damn, get to the story, disciple. Well, that mattered because I would miss the bus sometimes, and also the time before when we didn't qualify, so I would just walk in anyway. And she lived right across from the high school, so a lot of times I would time it, sometimes just by coincidence and sometimes intentionally, and we would walk in that literally those like 300 yards into Springfield Central High, because she literally was like right across from the school. And funny enough, my cousin, he's since sold it, but he used to have a duplex there for many years, for like 15 years, like right basically on her street. So anyway, as I'm walking in, he's coming out. We'll just call him M, and we both kind of give each other that look. Now me, I recognized him immediately, but I didn't want to be all weird and like, hey M, whatever. I had to kind of play it up because I was just matching energy, right, as they say. And as he was looking at me like, I recognize you, and kind of like the vision of my face like looming into sight, and him matching up my name to who he thinks I am. And then I kind of did the same to make it just seem organic, whatever. But I knew who he was immediately, even though I hadn't seen him in many years, since actually I think our 10-year reunion, which was like in 2007. He's like one of those cats that basically left the area as soon as he could. So anyway, like I said, he was a captain of the track team. I remember he ran the mile with me, right? So I was, I just ran the mile just so I could run in the pep rally and so people could cheer for me and so I could be popular or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I was, my best mile was maybe like about 5.5 minutes, like not fast. But he regularly ran like a 4:45 or whatever, which back in those days, that's not so fast anymore, but back, we're talking like 30 years ago, right? This is like 1995, 96, 97. That was like pretty quick back in those days. And, he's smaller. Even now, when I saw him, he's probably 5'8", 5'9", maybe like, I don't know, I'd say like $150 or so. There was a time when he got a little chunky after high school, but he's like slimmed down. And long story short, he has an MBA, he has an engineering degree, he's done really well. He lives down in New Jersey. As it turns out, basically the same town as my ex, which, I was about to move down there a couple years ago. And, we get to chatting, whatever. It was a little awkward, not so much on my part, but on his part, I could tell he was like, I don't know if like didn't necessarily want to be there, didn't necessarily want to engage me, but I think he was just off balance. Like, it's not like there's any dislike or anything like that. You know, so we ended up like exchanging numbers, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, we should grab a bite this weekend or whatever. I guess he's in town until next week. And of course I'm like, yeah, so how's S, you know, his wife, my former friend. And when I say like I know her, apart from walking in with her and having like a little thing for her, we were, you know, in class together from like freshman year, or not freshman, but ninth grade. So English honors, we sat like right next to each other, you know, all the way on up. And then, you know, obviously we kind of diverged. He had a very better than solid, a very good, very excellent high school career, and ended up going on to Columbia, and, you know, majored in biomedical engineering, and she does really well down in New Jersey with them, and, you know, they're doing wonderful. I kind of like from afar, you know, watch him on LinkedIn, whatever, like, you know, we're LinkedIn buddies, whatever. Even though we hadn't seen each other in almost 20 years. So anyway, he was like, yeah, just visiting her family, and I was like, oh, do they still live like right across from the high school? And he's like, yup. So it's just funny, you know, this is, you know, basically 30 years later, right? We graduated in 07. He was actually the year before me, 96. I'm really curious as to what their origin stories is like. Obviously they met in high school, but I don't know, you know, how they met, like the actual story, which I'll probably get over dinner or whatever this weekend if we do follow through. I kind of get the feeling that he might say like, oh, sorry, busy with family, whatever, but it's fine. Like, you know, I get it. So anyway, I just figured I'd kind of slip that in there. They're doing great. Happy for them. So Kevin Samuels, someone's always is always watching. That's where I was going with that, right? So he said certain things that let me know that even though we haven't really said a word to each other in years, he still is watching my LinkedIn and, you know, kind of paying attention somewhat from afar. I'm not saying like on some stalker or whatever, because obviously he can only see what I put there, right? So to bridge that concept, someone is always watching, even when you think they aren't. So, you know, cue the fog machine and the harp. So many years ago, this girl, we'll call her M as well, and I'm talking like 12 years ago. So this is after T, but, you know, before my, I guess you could say, torrent of, I shouldn't say torrent, that's not the right word, because I'm not a ladies' man, but, you know, my procession of girlfriends from, you know, 2015 to 2022. There was a girl before then, kind of a quasi-girlfriend situation, whatever, and then I was just, you know, they say either S or get off the toilet. I kind of felt like she was like in my back pocket, and she would just kind of always be there, and then, you know, life just happens, and you kind of, you know, she dates someone, I date someone, and then there would be some gaps in between. She would try to come back, and then I would just not see the forest for the trees and not have enough urgency, and then, you know, fast forward, you know, I lost my ex, you know, for at this point almost 3 years, and she's been married for 3+ years. You know, life is funny like that. And her history very much mirrors mine in terms of like dating woes, storyline, and whatever. And which is probably why we got along so well. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you why it didn't click the way it should. Maybe I thought I could do better or whatever. You know, I'll take that responsibility. So anyway, one of her really good friends, you know, we went to the beach together when she bought her house, and there's like a housewarming, whatever. And I distinctly remember, because I got there, picture me getting anywhere early, and she was house sitting for M, this other girl, and then she wasn't sure of me because, like, you know, she didn't know me. So then she had me basically stand at the front door, and then she called M or whatever, and then she was like, oh, because I'm not letting any strangers up in here, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, she was being kind of extra with it, whatever. And then, you know, M was like, oh, it's Disciple. He's fine. It's an old friend, whatever, blah, 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 whatever. And we all became, like, cool, whatever. And, you know, a couple times over the years went to the beach, which I don't anymore because, you know, she's married. She still has it, like, a skip work beach day, which they just had, like, a few weeks ago. Like, it's usually, like, the last weekend of, or last Friday of July. I haven't gone to one in many years, though. All right. Please do not tell me that the street is blocked. Or is there, I guess, the detours on the left there. So anyway, she had a story popped up with, this is the other girl, the girl that was like house sitting. So I either liked it or commented or emojied it, whatever. No big deal. Like, you know, like we all do. I had no intent, blah, 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 blah. And then I noticed, I didn't even notice that she wasn't following me because I'd been following her for years. I suspect what happened is we used to follow each other. And then since, you know, our person in common got married to someone else and we don't really communicate like that anymore. She probably thought better of it and then stopped following me, but I didn't realize, right? So then I see it pop up, we'll call her A, is following you, and I'm like, interesting. And then she inboxes me like, hi, just because girl game is like not really game or whatever. So whatever, and then off of that, we just start like just chatting or whatever. And then very quickly it's evident that she's like kind of like on some like what's up with you more or less. And me, I can't help myself, right? So I kind of we kind of give our what's supposed to be a bridge, but it ended up being like the long version, like kind of origin story. And I'm like still in the hangover of blah 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 blah, at work. And I told her I'd go to school, which I mean technically I'm on like a forced sabbatical, but like I'm still in school, right? That's still the idea, right? I'll be back next year hopefully. And then we're chatting, blah blah blah. So then we get into, and this is all broached by her. In the real world, most men, I don't believe, bring up like the 50-50 conversation, or what do you bring to the table, blah 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 blah. And then I just kind of like wind her up and then like let her go. And then you start to realize that like, so it actually, what kicked it off, she's like, yeah, so like, how do you feel about like, just handling everything in the household? Because I think she's probing to see like, how much do you earn? What are you willing to do? Is this even worth my while? Blah, blah, blah. And then, obviously I'm able to sniff it out. There's, you don't need to be like reverse Sherlock to figure that out or whatever. So I'm not going to like out myself, because like, yeah, if I hit it big and I'm just doing really well, my career's just on fire or whatever, like fine. I believe more in like effort and stress, as opposed to like just in terms of relationships, instead of just straight like numbers or proportional numbers. But then I also let her know that realistically most of us are not going to be in some guy takes care of everything, blah 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 blah. And I give an example of my cousin who earns like a regular salary. We make almost like to the dollar, basically the same amount of money. Like, we were talking about this the other day. And his wife stays at home. Like, well, their youngest is about to start kindergarten, so I think she's about to go back to teaching. If not this year, then next year. I know we've talked about that or whatever. So they kind of like struck the balance, right? So she's not going to be and she, in fairness, she's like a bit of a busybody, right? So she likes to work and be busy, whatever. Even as she was like stay at home the last 5 years, she would always have like either side hustle. She would always like, tutor on the side or whatever. So she wasn't completely idle, but at the same time, it wasn't like, punch the clock 9 to 5 or whatever. Because, basically the amount that they make, it's like he makes enough to take care of a household, especially by like, our parents' standards. Cause like, my mom raised me. I don't think my mom ever made more than like say $30,000, right? Times have changed though. You couldn't, even if you adjusted that for inflation, which would probably be like 70 grand today or whatever, I don't think a person with 70 grand, or say it was a man and a wife, and he was just going to do the traditional thing and take care of the whole household. I don't think you can take care of a whole household off of 70K, even if you wanted to. Maybe if you're like in Mississippi or something like that, but certainly not in Western Massachusetts, and for sure not in Eastern Massachusetts. So, I kind of gave the rationale, very cogent logic, as I usually do. And she was like, well, basically she wasn't impressed with that, right? She was like, and I didn't give any figures, but I mean, she could kind of feel out in general what I make or whatever. And she was like, well, I think everybody needs to, in so many words, like, like a lot of women do, like, water finds its level, you'll get what you deserve. But that's really just a backhanded way of saying like, well, if you're not going to provide, then you don't deserve anything, in so many words is what she was saying. And she says that while being like of a certain age, right? Like, I'm not ageist at all, but like, she's of a certain age. I'm like, so where are you going to find this guy that's like, you guys gel, he has the look that you want, and he's going to provide for everything? And like, how is that like a fair deal to him or whatever? But you're probably still wondering like, where's this ramble going? So she's like one of those people, I don't know how, I actually kind of admire people like this, because I've come across a few where like they work, but like not really. Like, it's kind of like very giggy type of work. And I mean, she lives like in Southern Connecticut, which is like expensive because like, it's adjacent to New York City. There's a lot of people that work in New York City and live in Southern Connecticut. And, she does one of those jobs where it's like, presenting, but I'm sure it's not, based on what I can observe, maybe I'm wrong, but it's like one of those jobs where it's like kind of like giggy work. Like, it's like a gig. It's not Some weeks you might work and then other weeks you might not. And again, people are always watching, so I'm always watching. So she would always kind of show off about or brag about doing Pilates at like 1 in the afternoon, or just going out for brunch on a random day, or whatever. She calls it gallivanting, like that's her joke or whatever. And she has a very well followed Facebook and Instagram page, like into the 5 figures, like tens of thousands. So she's like kind of insta famous for the area or whatever. And I say for the area because like all the black people pretty much in Information Corridor, which runs from like Springfield down to like New Haven, or if you want to extend it down to like New York City, we all in some way, shape, or form like know each other. That's another discussion. And so I can tell, like, just by observing your page, like I can't just go swimming or do Pilates or go for brunch or whatever at like 1 in the afternoon on like a random like Tuesday or Wednesday. So I know people like this, and I'm like, how do you even make ends meet? And then she starts to tell the story, and you start to kind of understand, right? Like so she drives like an older car. I won't identify it. I've probably given too many identifying factors anyway, but let's just say a late aughts Volvo. Before that, it was like a mid-teens Honda Accord. So like cars that are like, they're not beaters, but they're like these are things that you could conceivably just spend cash on, or if it is a car payment, you're talking like $300 or less, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing. So the thing that rose my antenna, and this is to bring it back to Kevin Samuels, he used to always say a lot of these women don't necessarily know what it means to like provide and to be a guy, because again, remember, she kind of led with more or less saying, I'm only dealing with a guy if he can provide for everything, and then we were talking about like, I don't know why this figure came up, but $30,000 car, right? So now you and I all know, $30,000 isn't what it used to be. That's pretty much that's not even a fully loaded Accord. A fully loaded Accord puts you like in the mid to upper 30s, if not 40 grand. Certainly a Camry is like 40 plus grand, because like now you can get with all-wheel drive and with hybrid and all these other features. Like the Camrys kind of surpassed the Accord for the longest time. They used to be like in lockstep with each other. I think for 30 you're talking like an LE, not even like an XSE or a Sport Edition, or certainly not the Limited or anything like that. But for the longest time they used to be like in lockstep. And I can remember when I was younger, if you had an Accord, it was almost viewed like you had kind of like an entry-level luxury car. Now an Accord is very similar to how we used to view like a Corolla, right? So she was, and we were talking about like $30,000, and I was like, yeah, that's probably about, with interest and stuff, probably like a $600 a month car payment. And then she like gasped. She was like, $600 a month? Oh, I would never make that kind of car payment. Like, the way she reacted to it is like, it's as if I said it was like a $1,200 car payment. I think I've seen the newer figures, like your average new car now is like $50,000. Your average car payment now is like approaching $1,000. That's just the price of doing business. That's just what life is now. And I know that for a lot of us, our minds are still in 2019 before COVID. But that's just kind of what it is. And then, we were talking, and I was like, yeah, at this point, I probably should have bought a house a while ago. At this point, I have to wait until I'm married, because I can't really afford a house on my own. And she was like asking, like, why can't you buy a house on your own? Well, no, I didn't say I can't afford it. I'm like, yeah, at this point, I can't buy a house by myself, whatever. And she's like, well, why can't you? And I was like, well, I can't afford it. Like, 5 years ago, I probably could, but like, your median price of a home now is like in the 450-ish range. And you figure at this point now, we're not talking starter homes or a basic home. You probably want something nice, right? So you're probably talking like at least into like the $500,000 range. That's just, again, $500,000 sounds like a big figure, but that's just kind of like regular money these days in a lot of ways. And it's like it didn't dawn on her. And I'm trying to, in a delicate sense, right? Because even though I've known her for a while, like this is our first time really like getting acquainted in any real substantive way. And I could tell that the numbers were just glossing over her head. And I'm trying to tell her in a very gentle way, like, in general, no regular guy that you meet is going to be able to afford that by themselves. And she loves Porsches, and like, that's her dream car, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, so let's say, all right. So, and she's like, I love like a Porsche Targa, and I want to wrap it in pink, and all this like fantastical stuff. Like, probably not even realizing that a good wrap is like thousands of dollars, right? That even that's like no change. Like, it's like $3,000 for like a good wrap, if not more. And I could tell that she didn't really get that. So I'm like, well, you like a Targa, right? So I'll I'll meet you where you're at. So let's say you got like a lightly used Porsche. It wouldn't be a Targa, but like even a base or whatever, and you got it at a great price, like 70 grand. Like, who has $70,000 just sitting around? Because you're saying like, yeah, I'm just gonna buy a car cash, and then that's where it was like backpedal. Like, but again, I'm not trying to badger her and realize that she's like unraveling her own argument. She's like, well, I would just get like, whatever, I would just get like something for 30K or whatever. And I'm like, you realize that 30K isn't what you thought it was. You know what you think it is. That's not even a loaded Corolla, right? Which is kind of like the epitome of like, economy, but eco box. And of course, like, there's like the GR Corolla, which is like, can be like 50 depending on which one you get, or beyond, to get like that rally sport version. And I forget the track version, what it's called. Actually, I think it's called the GR Track. That can be like 50 and beyond. But whatever. I wouldn't get any wins by like just getting into like the minutia. Like the mission was more or less accomplished, and then she was like, I think everybody will be fine, and blah blah blah. At the end, I'm like, no, I actually don't think so. At least, and the numbers, bear that out. And then she kind of again went back to the, well, not everybody needs to have children, and blah blah blah. And like, imagine being that flippant about something as important as children. Like, if you want them, right? Because that's like the difference between like almost like a failed life in a lot of ways, or an unfulfilled life, I think, is the way that I want to reference it as. Is, that's the difference between like an unfulfilled life and a fulfilled life. For a lot of people, it's not the way they drew it up. If they are unable to have a kid, it's one thing if it's like medical, right? Like, if that happens, then you can only control what you can control. But imagine just writing off a child if you really want one, just for like external factors like, money, and then, the vast majority of women just thought you weren't good enough, right? And that's kind of like a big discourse in this, in the world right now, certainly in the United States. That's a huge part of the reason why Kamala lost, is because a lot of men think that like a lot of the policies and just the discourse right now in terms of like what's coming from the my party, the Democrat Party, is like anti-male. Think of I can't remember her name, Navarro. Why can't I remember her first name? From The View, I think she'd said like basically like, we don't need men, or men suck, or something like that. Like, just kind of getting too swept up in like rhetoric and emotion, not realizing what she said. And that's like a huge talking point. Like, I legit believe that one statement cost like hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a couple million votes in terms of swing, which is, how much did Kamala lose by? That's huge. So I think a lot of people have big ideas and big opinions on things without necessarily understanding the logistics. And the conversation is kind of like still ongoing in the DMs, but I think the mission's already been accomplished. I have in the past, like, I don't want to say like lost friends or whatever, but like certainly created animus just from like pressing my my argument maybe too much. But I thought that was very instructive, and that was definitely like one of the thrusts of Kevin Samuels, where for a lot of men, they just kind of want families and peace, and this divide. Some people call it misinjury. Some people say it started because of misogyny, and it's just kind of like a battle of the sexes, and maybe it's just evolution, right? And we're going through this rough patch, and things will like will course correct. But one thing that Kevin Samuels used to always say is that like a lot of women don't really understand the cost of being a man. Like, the idea of like just covering everything is often just kind of steeped in ignorance and just like not understanding. And I have my theories about that as it pertains to her, but this has already run too long. But I think you can piece two and two together, especially as someone whose career appears to be a gig. Like, I'll learn more obviously in the coming, days or weeks or whatever, or not. But I think my opinion is formed by the facts given thus far. But anyway, this is what was a half hour. It's run way too long. Stay with me. God bless.